Chair. A lot of this has been covered by Deputy O'Keefe's contribution, but just a couple of things to pick up on, I suppose. First of all, to welcome our guests. Carers Allowance is something I regularly deal with, as I'm sure other members do. Notwithstanding the new means test that will come into place in June, I still get a lot of people who are getting very little in payment-wise. So the means test that's under review at the moment is Carers Allowance being considered as part of that, because in my personal opinion we need to get to a stage where there is no means test for Carers Allowance, given the wonderful work to do. But just to get a comment on Carers Allowance and the current means test on that. An issue I brought up the last day, Chair, was in relation to fuel allowance, and I gave an example of a pensioner who does not qualify for fuel allowance because their gross income is above the threshold, but when they take the tax that they pay off, they actually would qualify. The reply I got that day was that the means test is based on gross, but this person is not qualifying for warmer home scheme. They live in a 50-year-old house which needs upgrading, and this disqualifies them. And again, maybe you could get a comment on this. It seems to me, to use a term, grossly unfair that this person is being deprived of such a scheme because they're being assessed on gross rather than net income, which they obviously can't spend. A question, I suppose, a third question then is in relation to, I get a lot of queries in relation to clinics, etc., where the request is for bank accounts. And a lot of these bank accounts are closed over a vast number of years, some of them 30 and 40 years old, and those applying have to go through banks, etc. Some of them have closed down, the likes of Ulster Bank, etc. So the question, I suppose, is what access do social welfare have to bank accounts? Do they know the details of a person's bank accounts? Do they not know they're closed, most importantly? And maybe we could get a comment on that, because it is a stress for people when they're told that they have to supply a bank account details, and they go into a bank or they try and get in contact with a bank and they're told that that's closed for 30 or 40 years. Maybe a comment on that. A comment on the means test review. It's ongoing at the moment. When is it going to finish? When do we expect the report? And then on the capital disregard, and I know Deputy O'Keefe touched on this as well, the first 20,000, I come across a lot of people, I'm sure colleagues do as well, who've saved for that rainy day, be it their funeral expenses, etc., which brings into another question in relation to the funeral grant. But concentrating on capital disregard, the first 20,000 is way too low. How old? I presume it's 20 plus years old. I know that Mr. Egan has said in reply that it's been reviewed at the moment. It obviously needs to increase because it is causing a lot of stress for people who, as I say, have that 20,000, as they call it, for the rainy day. And particularly in relation to supplementary welfare, which the capital disregard is €5,000. To me, that's way too low in relation to the people I deal with, who again have that bit of savings for that rainy day, for that funeral expense, but they're actually being disallowed on payments because the capital disregard is just at 5,000. Agree with what Deputy O'Keefe is saying in relation to qualified adult. I've had 3 cases in the last couple of weeks, one case where people put their money into joint accounts and they didn't get the maximum qualified adult account. The other 2 cases, thankfully, had them in the one person's account and they did get that. So there is an issue there. And then the last question, or last comment, I suppose, Chair, is in relation to standardisation of means tests. There are, in my experience, differences between what's called for in a number of payments and what's needed. And is the whole review going to concentrate on standardising a means test that will make it a lot easier for people when they come into my office, and I'm sure colleagues' offices? The amount of questions that are asked, in some cases up to 20 questions in relation to a means test, is just beyond comprehension for many people, and it needs to be standardised. Thanks, Chair.
Regan.
Thank you, Senator. Just in relation to the Carers Allowance, it will be considered as part of our means review. It's also being considered as part of an interdepartmental group that the Minister has announced with colleagues from the Department of Health to look at Carers Allowance as well. So it's riding. It's going to be covered by both reviews. In relation to, I hear your point about having no means test for the Carers Allowance, but just to be aware, such an approach would cost several hundred million, the Department believes, so it will have a significant cost in relation to that. In terms of fuel allowance, social welfare means assessments are typically earnings are assessed are at a gross level, but we do subtract PRSI, union subscriptions and pension contributions. So the approach with fuel allowance is in line with that you've articulated, and that's set out. We don't deduct tax from our means tested schemes in the way that you've articulated from a fuel allowance perspective. I think it would add to complexity, but also there would be a significant cost associated with that, which I don't have a figure to hand on what would be involved in that, Senator. I will ask my colleague, Mr. Flynn, to come in on the bank accounts question, but just before that, in terms of the means test review, we had said that we wanted to finish this by this quarter, but I am conscious there's an awful lot of contributions have been made here this morning that we'll have to work through in relation to that in terms of the means review. So we'll have to touch base with the Minister following today's meeting in terms of timelines, but it was the intention to do it by the end of this month. But I think a lot of the very valid points that have been raised, but we need to be carefully considered in the context of that review. In terms of capital disregards, I take the point in terms of the levels, they haven't been changed. The last time they were changed was back in 2005 for most schemes. 2007 we increased the disability allowance from 20,000 up to 50,000, and then in 2022 we increased Carers Allowance from 20,000 up to 50,000 in line with the disability allowance. So they're the last two changes. And then I hear what you're saying, Senator, in relation to the SWA capital disregard of being 5,000. In terms of your point about the standardisation of means tests, at the moment we're looking in terms of review of core policies and principles that would be applied. But I think it would, like we've over 90 schemes in the department. Not all are means tested, but there will continue to be different means rules for different schemes, depending on obviously government decisions in relation to that. So at this moment I can't see there will be a single means test, but we will seek to standardise where it makes sense, to narrow differences, and obviously I think this will take a period of several budgets to align fully in terms of what we're articulating in the means review. I might ask my colleague, Mr. Flynn, to come in.
Yeah, sorry, further to what Niall was just saying, just in relation to the question about fuel allowance and warmer homes. Obviously the warmer home scheme under the SAI has a range of qualifying schemes, not just fuel allowance, but obviously fuel allowance is one of the major ones, but a range of social welfare schemes other than fuel allowance provide access into that scheme. The other point about bank account requests, obviously the department works with customers to get the information that they require to support their claims, including in respective means. And obviously we have to get the relevant information to support the customer's position. In respect of the bank accounts, obviously this is very private information for individuals, and we're very conscious of that and work with them to get the relevant information that's necessary to support that, whilst being mindful of the responsibility to the Oireachtas to manage the overall budget and be careful in terms of making sure we're providing the relevant payment at the right rate based on the correct means evidenced. Just in relation to the range of different capital assessments, yeah, there's a range of capital assessments in place at the moment, but as my colleague said, it's important that we're getting the principles right, getting back to the purposes of the schemes and why the assessments are at the rates that they are. So again, it's not a question of standardisation in terms of having a single means test, because obviously the range of schemes, 60, 70, 80 schemes that the department has, provides for different contingencies, and we don't think there is a one-size-fits-all approach. So we want to try and provide appropriate levels of capital assessment given the purposes of the underlying schemes.
Senator Wall, anything further to contribute?
Yeah, just I thank both contributors back and thank Mr. Flynn, but unfortunately this person does not qualify under the other means for warmer homes. This is the fuel allowance is the only way that she may qualify, so I think it's actually wrong, and maybe we could look at that, because 15 years is all she's over, and you know, as I say, she's been disqualified from a very good scheme that she needs for her home. And just in relation to the bank accounts, I suppose, Chair, just what access do social welfare have to bank accounts? I don't think we actually got that reply. So if I have 3 or 4 bank accounts, do social welfare know I have 3 or 4 bank accounts? Do they know how much I have in them? It's a question I get asked regularly, and maybe it's an answer we could get today. Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, my understanding is the customer will provide the bank accounts on request to the department.
I appreciate that, Mr. Flynn, and that does actually happen. But then I do get requests from people with, as I said, for another bank account that they're not even familiar with that has been closed. So my question today is, what bank account details does the Department of Social Protection have for a person? So in other words, do they know how many bank accounts a person does have? Because I get a lot of queries in my office for a bank account that wasn't provided, that ends in 309 or whatever that number is, and when we try and follow that up, it's actually a closed bank account which has been there for 20, 30 years. So that's the query I have. What detail does the Social Protection have in relation to bank accounts held by an applicant?
I think we'll have to come back to you on that particular question around closed bank accounts, Senator.
I would appreciate that, Chair, if that's okay. Appreciate it.
Very good.